When I was contacted this year, I was asked to come in and talk about kind of the status of the pension situation in Arizona, both on the statewide level and particularly to the city of Phoenix as well. And then to also talk about a campaign that we had to run last year where the money interest wanted to close the city of Phoenix system and stop Phoenix from participating in the statewide public safety plan. So we're going to try to run through a little bit of background and history and then talk about the campaign itself, and we're going to try to do that in 25 minutes. So we have a few minutes for questions. So the election itself was called Prop 187. I don't know about Texas, but in Arizona, a lot of the Rocky Mountain states, a lot of the western states in their constitution have the right to referendum and initiative. And in Arizona's case, that applies to local jurisdictions as well as the state. Unfortunately, in recent years, the term citizen initiative has been kind of a misnomer because these have been campaigns that have been funded by wealthy out-of-state interest. So we'll get started here. So it is a case review in defeating anti-retirement security initiatives. I used the longer title rather than just pension because this initiative dealt with other OPEBs in addition to the fundamental pension. Little history and political perspective on where Arizona is at. It's a very, very red state. Both legislative houses are Republican majorities. All constitutional officers are currently Republican and have been for a long time. So there's a small Democratic minority that is currently so small in the legislature that statewide they have very little SWAT or ability to change or leverage the discussion. So Phoenix itself is a little bit different. It's one of those blue pockets for the most part. Both the electorate and the city council members, except for 2 council members out of 9, including the mayor, are very conservative. The rest are either progressive to moderate. And some of the things that help with moderation and political discussion in the city is the fact that the council races are nonpartisan. We have a district system and charter government. So who are some of the players in the pension reform movement? Some of these you're going to be familiar with because they're national, some of them are not. In Arizona, we have one of the conservative think tanks known as the Goldwater Institute. I'm sure you have some comparable body to that is funded primarily by the Koch brothers and other like-minded wealthy individuals from within and without the state. The Arizona State Chamber, there's the Phoenix Chamber, and then there's the Arizona State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The Arizona Free Enterprise Club, which is just a branch of the national organization who agitate for all things anti-government and anti-employee. The Arizona Republic, which is our local newspaper, which is part of the Gannett chain, which chose to engage themselves in the discussion and to side wholeheartedly and completely with the Goldwater Institute, the Free Enterprise Club, and ALEC. Another player you may or may not have heard of, but you should know about, is called the Liberty Initiative Fund. It is out of Virginia. It's funded by another multi-billionaire by the name primarily of Paul Jacobs, who gets involved in funding initiatives and signature gathering for a variety of conservative causes. The Reason Foundation, which is right out of here in Texas. The Action Now Initiative, which is really part of the Reason Foundation, is kind of the political arm of the Reason Foundation. Gets involved out of state and got involved heavily in our state as well. And our legislative leadership, which again is primarily not only Republican leaning, but very conservative wing of the Republican Party leaning, and are very active and frequently take leadership roles in ALEC. So, for purposes of background as well, unlike Texas, we don't have a lot of local plans. There are 2 local plans. The City of Phoenix and the City of Tucson themselves have their own plans for their general employees. All other general employees in the state, whether they're state employees, municipal, county, or teachers, belong to what we call the big system, which is the Arizona State Retirement System. Folks like myself, I'm a firefighter. All firefighters and police officers in the state, if you have a badge you swear, other than correctional officers, you're in the public safety system. That covers every municipality, highway patrol, livestock investigators, liquor control investigators, game and fish investigators, wildland firefighters, if you name it. If you're in public safety, you're in the public safety system. Then the correctional officers have their own plan, and probation and parole is in that system as well, and then the elected official plan. Judges are in the elected officials plan. Plus you have these 2 local plans. Anybody want to guess who has the richest set of benefits? Who? Elected officials and judges, right? So, and the rest of us get to follow. What's interesting is for purposes of administration and investment and all of those things, the 3 public safety correctional officers and elected officials are all administered by public safety. And they had completely separate funds. And beginning in 2009, all that was blended into what's called a unitized trust for purposes of investment. But they're still separate plans with slightly different, or in some cases, significantly different benefit structures. So that's kind of our background. So in 2010, our legislature meets every year, beginning in January of every year. Supposed to be a 100-day session, usually goes about 6 months. So in the previous summer, the pension reform players began agitating, primarily through the media, through presentations to groups, through lobbying the legislature, that all of the systems in Arizona needed to be changed, and primarily they needed to be closed, and they all needed to be turned into DC plans. So ALEC worked with the Goldwater Institute, the conservative think tank, to write a 10-piece expose on the costs and the burdens of pensions, and they called it pension tension. The Arizona Republic picked that out, and then the chamber republished it to all of their members. The Arizona Republic picked up that 10-piece article or paper, if you want to call that, and without what we believe was any type of journalistic rigidity or inquiry, basically republished the whole thing. 10 parts, each part Sunday paper, followed up by little pieces in between every day of the week for 10 weeks about not the 10 lowest pensioners, but the 10 highest pensioners, or selected investments that didn't pan out, told the story of the system, and at that time, and still is, in financial trouble, but just made the most negative arguments that it could, and called the whole thing pension tension, which would lead us into session in January, with legislation led by the Speaker of the House, who happened to be setting up to run for Congress. And of course wanted to be the most conservative person in the room for the primary. So he drove a lot of this for his personal reasons. But we did have real issues. And when I talk about this, I try to ask people to look at their system or look at their pension troubles or their attacks and look at it in 2 different views. But the first view has to be an honest-to-goodness, honest look at your system and what is the financial situation. What is the funding level? What is the contribution level? What are all those things that can play into the second piece, which is the political piece, and our enemies or the enemies, defined benefit plans, advocates of DC, however you want to describe it, that want to either reduce or eliminate our benefits or our plans. So one of the first things you have to look at is in your own house. We had troubles. We had a bad funded level. We had a high employer contribution rate. The employee rate is fixed. And then we had issues with what we call excess earnings distribution. Like I said, I've got 25 minutes, so I'm going to sound a little bit like an auctioneer in this place to try and get through it, but give you just a really base overview of what we were looking at financially. Our system, remember this, has a 7-year smoothing period. At that time, the employees contributed a fixed rate of 7.65%, and the employers paid the float. For years, that was very good for the employers. In 2000, the system was 136% funded. We were still paying 7.65%, and the employers were banking credits for future years. They had repeatedly rejected the idea of a minimum employer contribution rate that would get banked for a rainy day. But that was the situation. We all know what happened to the markets in 2001, right? Early 2002. Well, our situation was even worse, and it was exacerbated because at that time, our pension administrator had almost sole authority, much more authority than the Board of Trustees did at that time, to set investment policy and investment decisions, and it was thought it was wise and cheaper for most of that investment activity to go on in-house with in-house staff directed by that single administrator, that you drove up your administrative costs by hiring outside managers and advisors and sector advisors and all those pieces that are good things to do. So he had a lot of control. He was also limited somewhat by the fact that how the system could invest and was run was mandated by Arizona revised statute, which had been passed when the system was established in the late 60s and not changed since then. So now we roll into 2001, right? The tech bubble burst, the meltdown, the whole 9 yards. And our pension administrator, as those stocks are falling, thinks that those are good buys and continues to buy what we called the dirty dozen, and in less than 6 months erased a third of the value of the fund. In 6 months, what took 30 years to build was gone. So to make a really long story really short, we've got that 7-year smooth period, right? So you got to eat all of those losses. In that meantime, we were able to get the legislature to change a lot of things, get more authority to the board, establish an investment policy, blah, 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 blah. So 7 years later is when? What happens in 2008? Everything goes bad again, right? So this time, because of the changes, we don't lose as much as everybody else, but we still lose a lot. So now you're rolling into another 7 years. So the other thing that was going on is we have what's called an excess earnings account. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. That's our third piece of trouble, whereby Bob Klausner talked about a COLA. We don't really have a COLA, but we use that for ease of terminology, right? What we have is an excess earnings permanent benefit increase. So anytime the fund earned over 9%, which in those days was its assumed earnings rate, half of everything over 9% went into a separate fund to fund permanent increases to the retirees. Not tied to rate of inflation, nothing. Again, not a COLA. There was a separate calculation that figured out how much the retirees got, and then it was costed actuarially for the rest of their life, and the next one was compounded. The max you could get was 4%. So in the really good years, a lot of money would go into the excess earnings account. So the retirees got 4% a year compounded for 28 years straight. So when we got into trouble, the excess earnings account did not cause the trouble, but it became the main stumbling block to recovery. Because what's happened in a lot of ways with the markets since then? They've been kind of yo-yoed. You get some really great years and you get some bad years. Not so much the smooth ride that went along for a really long time. So what happened to the fund is in the good years, it had to give up half the cream, and in the bad years, it had to eat all of the loss. So by 2010, we have gone from 136% funded in 2000, 2001, to now we're at about 65% funded. 66% funded. So you all know how that works, right? The contribution rate and the funded levels at seesaw. One end goes up, the other goes down, right? So when funded levels are down, employer rates are up. So that was the financial piece of pension tension. The other piece is during that period of time, you had public defined benefit pensions front and center, bullseye on the radar of ALEC and all their associated groups. So while an attack on us in Arizona might look, well, they're having funded problems, it didn't matter. When you looked around the country, you looked at, I think it was North Dakota or South Dakota, Florida, other states that were either 100 or near 100% funded, they were facing the same attacks with the same verbiage. And what was the verbiage? Unsustainable burden, robbing of the taxpayers, greedy public safety servants at the trough. It didn't matter what your funded level was, there was an agenda, and they were trying to carry it out in every state. The funded levels of some states just made it easier than others. So we talked already about how the think tanks and the chamber and the paper kind of all got together and ran this thing. And it was in some ways, it was unbelievable the things that people could get away with saying about public servants. You had the economist for the Goldwater Institute write an opinion piece where he wrote, "They're the smartest thugs I've ever known. They found a way to legally steal from us. They are nothing but thieves." And this went on every day, every week, for months. And we had a whole media strategy where, you know, we countered it, we went back at them. It's kind of hard to do when the the only newspaper in town is completely in the bag for the other side. You know, we had stories about our retirees whose pensions didn't even pay their entire health care cost. We don't have subsidized health care for public safety retirees in Arizona. They didn't get a COLA for years and years, so those on the smallest pensions are really hurting. Like I said, the Speaker of the House really wanted to ride this for his upcoming run for Congress, which I'm happy to say he lost in the primary. But what did happen is in that process, they passed a piece of legislation during the 2011 session called Senate Bill 1609 and made numerous changes to future active and retired benefits. Most of the changes for the retirees have now been found by the Arizona Supreme Court to be unconstitutional, which we warned them of when they were running this bill, that you're going to do things that are unconstitutional, and then you're going to make this situation worse for the fund, because not only are you going to have to go back to the old mechanisms and the old payments, but now you're going to owe them back with interest. And that's exactly what has happened. Today we are at 50.6% funded because the Supreme Court reversed everything that they did to the retirees. The next case is really interesting. I wish Bob was still in the room because this is really an interesting legal deal. The next set of lawsuits are called the Hall case and the Parker case, and they deal with the changes that were forced upon the actives, including increasing our employee contribution rate by over 50% and taking away our future COLA. That affected all three of those systems that I talked about: cops, firefighters, correctional officers, elected officials, and judges. So the judges ruled on the retired judges, the Supreme Court, because they weren't yet retired, so there was no conflict. These two cases deal with the actives in what's called Tier 1, original hires, anybody hired before 2012, which everybody on the Supreme Court has been there. So they have recused themselves and appointed a panel of Tier 2, which means brand new judges, to act in lieu of the Supreme Court. So we are going to get a Supreme Court ruling about active employees that aren't really Supreme Court judges. So they come from Superior, they're all new judges from Superior Court that are going to act as the Supreme Court. So hang on to your hat. Okay, so now You get legislation in 2011 and 2012. Paul Jacobs' Reason Foundation fund a signature gathering effort in Tucson to change their city charter, which would close their general employee system, put everybody in a DC-only plan, and establish no minimum required contribution on the part of the city. One of the things that we've found, and we've known this for years, so we just used it with this campaign, is most of the signature gathering companies, they're kind of like carnies. I think when the guys get done setting up the circus, then they go out to Fry's and Kroger and start gathering signatures. So it's fairly easy, if there's only a certain number of signatures gathered, to analyze those signatures and find that a lot of them are illegal. They've either been gathered by felons, or they've forged people's names, or done a number of things like that. So they collected enough signatures to put that on the ballot in Tucson, but acting with other labor organizations, we were able to go to court and get a number, in this case, a huge number of signatures thrown out, so it never made its way to the ballot. So then in 2014, don't forget Phoenix has its own general employee system. The same characters, this time, not so much Paul Jacob and Liberty Initiative Fund, but John Arnold and Company dropped a single check of $400,000 to gather the signatures to put on the ballot in the city of Phoenix a charter change, which again would have closed the general employee system, but it went even further. What it said is it went after everybody, but it did it differently. It said that the city could no longer make contributions to a pension system or any other OPEBs. So what it did with the general system is it closed the general system, and then said they had to go into a DC, but then said it couldn't make any OPEB contributions to anything. So like in our case, the city of Phoenix initiative does not have the ability to close the public safety plan, but it would have made it illegal for the city to make any more contributions to the plan. So, and it would have said no more city subsidized health care. We get a small subsidy from the city for our health care. You wouldn't have had any more 457, or those who have 401A, 401A. That would have all been illegal, and it would have closed the plant. And we figured that it would cost the city, the actuaries figured, we didn't figure, by closing the plan, because you still have all those liabilities you've already booked, it would have cost the city about $500 million to $600 million, but then how do you make a contribution if you can't make a contribution? So the one thing that everybody agreed on with this is that with the charter changes, it would have invited, see if I can get this to work, it would have invited a lot of lawsuits. Every attorney agreed that would have invited a lot of lawsuits, and the legal work and wrangling and cost would have gone on for years, not to mention the contract clause or the pension clause lawsuits. We have language in Arizona in our Constitution, sounds like it's similar to yours, that says that the benefits of the beneficiary shall neither be reduced nor impaired. So one of the questions in the Phoenix case would have been, that's Arizona State Constitution, does that apply to the city funds, the City of Phoenix fund as well? Most folks agreed that it did. So we had to figure out what to do, and we had some options. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we went out and we polled, see what the voters were at. And we were a little bit surprised, not shocked, but a little bit surprised to see that we weren't starting out on even ground. We figured we were at least even in the polling. Because again, it's a moderate to progressive city. But over the years, there's been a lot of anti-pension talk as well, right? So, but what we found was, and we were losing in all demographics, including Democratic men, which nationally had always been your best polling number for defined benefit public systems, was Democratic men. We weren't losing huge with Democratic men, but it was a couple of points. The other thing we saw is that voters had generally positive attitudes of DC plans and viewed them as pensions. I mean, all of us in this room, we know that that DC plans, 457s, 401ks were originally passed by Congress to be, what's the actual title? They're supplemental retirement savings plans. They're not pensions. Well, the DC world has done such a good job of selling that almost everybody in the public now thinks if you have a pension, you have a DC. They don't even know what a DB plan is anymore, for the most part. The other thing it revealed is that voters had a very high opinion of city employees, and that's all city employees. But of course, police were higher than general employees, and then firefighters were the highest. And that the public would take their cues, even if they leaned towards DC, about what to do about pensions from firefighters. And then there was a very high concern for public safety, death, and disability benefits, just as years ago there was in California. So with the confusing legal language, with bad polling, and it being hard to go out and raise money for a campaign when you're losing in polling, what did we do? So we had meetings with all of our members, and we put the facts to them, and we put the options to them, and the options is to skip a campaign, save the money, and fight the battle in court. Because we felt the legal language is so bad, you could probably win in court, but the other piece of that is it could go on for a very long time. Go all in and pay for it ourselves, because we knew we weren't going to get a lot of outside money based on the polling. One thing about our organization that I would encourage all of you out there that are associated with labor organizations that I know are here is we've been saving for a rainy day for a very long time, both on a local level and a statewide level. You've known for years that this stuff was coming. You just didn't know when or how it was going to manifest itself. So do yourselves a favor and pack that seed money away. Because the other thing in campaigns, even if you do have winning numbers, is everybody wants to know what's your skin in the game. What are you guys doing? It affects you. How much money do you have in? We'll match you. If you got nothing to match, you got nothing to match. So save for that rainy day. So we had a very healthy emergency defense fund, and the members were willing to, I'll use the term, tax themselves again to add to it. Or mount a very aggressive 30-day grassroots campaign and see if we can change the conditions on the ground that would show up in follow-up polling to make it easier to go raise money for a follow-on campaign. Who in here is a firefighter? Oh, there's a few of you. Okay. So these guys know what I'm going to talk about is changing the conditions. Sometimes when you get to a fire, the building's too hot, there's too much smoke, there's too much fire, you can't really mount an aggressive interior campaign, attack. So just like here, you have to make a decision. Are we going to go defensive, or are we going to try to change the conditions in the fire ground so that we can mount an aggressive attack at that point? So those were the kind of decisions that we were faced with. So what the members chose to do, and we told them, you know, normally we go out, we represent you, we defend you, and you guys back us up. This is the opposite. You guys got to go do it. We'll make the campaign work, but only you can go knock on the doors and do the things that are needed to change conditions on the ground. So that's what we decided to do. That's what they voted to do. So knock, knock, who's there? A firefighter. 90,000 doors in 30 days. So, and we mounted a social media campaign that was very organic. Wives, families participated in it. And in 30 days, we knocked over 90,000 targeted voter doors and had over 100,000 social media contacts. Then we resurveyed. We moved from a losing position to a winning position. Slightly, but enough to be competitive. And when you can show that you can change the conditions on the ground in a campaign and that your members are committed, then you can go out and raise the money aggressively that you need to run a traditional campaign. So, and we needed a lot of money because in Arizona last year, every single member of the legislature, every single constitutional officer, every member, did I say the legislature already, and Congress were all running at the same time. So mail got real expensive, TV got real expensive, plus just kind of the noise level. You have to have a big enough campaign in that environment to be able to break through the noise level to get to the voters. So we stayed grassroots, 180,000 doors, $1 million in TV, 12 pieces of targeted mail. For those of you that aren't familiar, what I mean by targeted mail is you're not just mailing every household, you're not just mailing every voter. You're mailing the voters that you want to reach, either for turnout pieces or polling has showed them to be in a persuadable demographic, that they're on the fence. So you need to change their mind and bring them your way. And that's a way that, of course, you can be more efficient with your money as well. We put together a great speakers bureau. I mean, there's block watch groups, there's PTAs. We had over 100 firefighters volunteer for that. We did well over 100 events. We also did block watch parties. I mean, you name it, we did it. And then we did 2 what I call punch in the gut TV ads. We're going to show at least one of them here in a minute to reach the voters that talked about firefighter and police officer death and disability. And then we expanded that web presence as well, not only the social media pieces, but the banner ads, the clicks, the geofencing, all of the different stuff you can do with YouTube and Google and all those things to reach the millennials and those who are tied to the web. Can we go ahead and run that ad, please? All right, thank you. So Danielle was young wife of a police officer. She, their second child was born 2 weeks after his death. Her family's all firefighters, and we thought that there was a deep connection there. And you see E18 Productions there is another thing you might want to remember. The IFF has their own production studio, and they develop these ads for us. They film these ads for us, and they're available to help other folks out. So election night ended up being great. We were predicted to lose by 60%, and we won by 60%. Just briefly, some winning arguments, primarily public safety. The electorate's willing to listen about pensions if you educate them, and they have a higher opinion of all city employees than what has been widely publicized. One of our winning arguments, too, is at least for public safety, we don't get Social Security. So we rode that horse, too, that this is our sole retirement security for us and our families was our pension. So what's next? The defeat of 487 stopped the next step. Their plan was to pass one in Tucson, pass one in Phoenix, go to the statewide ballot. At least for now, to stop the statewide ballot discussion. And we do have issues with our system over funding, and firefighters are leading the charge in our state to do that fix. It's difficult to do it with the constitutional restrictions, but we have a way that we can do it where we can say, open the door to put in the fix and close the door and retain our protection to do not diminish or impair. There's a variety of political ways we can do that, either initiative or referendum. So with that, thank you. I know that was a lot of information in a very short time. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.